All right, take a good look, because by the time you see this again, it ain't gonna look like this. In this overlanding space, especially in my vehicle, one thing that I try to do once in a while is really step outside of my comfort zone and do things that are way over my head. And in this video, I'm doing exactly that by attempting my own vehicle wrap. Now, before we actually continue with this video, let me just first say, those of you who run like a vinyl wrapping business and are professionals in vinyl wrapping vehicles, man, you guys, kudos to you, because this was extremely hard. So in this video, I'm going to take you through that hair pulling process that I just went through. Needless to say, this is not going to be an instructional video. I'm not going to take you step by step on how to wrap your own vehicle, because quite frankly, I am not an expert enough to show you how to do that. What I am going to do is take you through the process that I just went through, kind of show you the challenges I had, some of the issues I ran into, but also some of the best practices that I've learned along the way. If you wrap vehicles for a living and you know what you're doing, and you see something in this video that I can improve upon, or something that I did wrong, or any tips you might have to offer, drop it in the comments below. Just please don't be mean in your comments. Keep in mind, this is the first time that I've done something like this, and I might be sensitive and in my feelings. So let me show you some of the materials you're going to need, and then I'll show you how I wrap. Chicka chicka, what? Now, this vinyl was sent to me by a company called TinyBot Vinyl. Shout out to them for agreeing to do this video, knowing well that I have never wrapped a vehicle before. But I had reached out to them saying, hey, I have this crazy idea on doing a video on whether or not someone who's never wrapped a vehicle before can actually wrap their own vehicle. They liked the idea, and they sent me a 60-foot roll of the vinyl color that I wanted. Now, the color I went for is what they call metallic brown ash. And I am in love with this color. It changes in certain lights, but not like dramatically, right? Not like a chameleon kind of color, but like cloudy days, this ends up looking like a grayish brown. But then when the sun is hitting it, or during golden hour most specifically, it turns into this like sandy metallic brown color, which I truly love. I just love how this reflects light. You probably can't tell in this video, but this thing is gorgeous. Now, they sent me a 60-foot roll. Just for perspective, this was able to wrap the entire Jeep and in the hood 3 times, because I had to redo the hood 3 times. But keep in mind also, I didn't wrap the hardtop, nor did I wrap the roof. You might be wrapping something that's not a Jeep and are probably gonna wrap the roof, but I'm just kind of giving you an overall perspective on how much 60 feet will actually cover. And then they also sent me this, and when I first got this, I'm like, what the hell is that? Are they sending me a pizza? Because I could totally use a pizza right now. Actually, I just wanted to quickly shout out like how dope their marketing and branding is, because like this box is like super nice, and then you open it, it has like, look at this. But this is what was inside. And when I got this, I'm like, well, what the hell is that? So this is actually a tool that will allow you to wrap your rear view mirrors with one person. A lot of times it takes 2 people, one to kind of heat up the vinyl and the other one kind of to pull it through and help stretch it in places. Well, this allows you to do it with one person. You basically take your vinyl, you put it on here, stick it onto this thing, heat it up with a gun so it gets a little like very malleable. And then with one person, you basically just pull it through your rear view mirror and it will just form to your rear view mirror a lot easier. I am not going to be using this though, because I don't plan to wrap my rear view mirrors, but the way they designed this with all the little graphics on it looks really cool. So I think I'm gonna probably hang this up. And finally, they sent me this. This is their ceramic protection spray, which will help protect your vinyl and keep it from fading too quickly. Now, I also did buy some tools to do the wrap. I had this extra Maxpedition case laying around. I'm like, oh, this is perfect to hold all the tools for wrapping. You don't need all of this. This was actually, some of these tools are from when I do vinyl stickers. But really, for the vehicle wrap, you really just need something like this. This basically helps you spread it. You need a blade. This is, I believe, a 30-degree angle blade. And buy extra cartridges to refill it, because you always want like the sharpest blade possible to make the cutting easier. And then I also got this thing right here that allows you to cut the vinyl. You just put this, run it through, and it'll cut the vinyl way easier for you than you sitting there with a pair of scissors. And I also bought myself a new heat gun. This was my old heat gun, and I tried using it for the first couple days, and the trigger on it is in the front. And it's very hard because you are holding vinyl and trying to hold it in place and stretching it and trying to get the trigger to go on and off with this finger when you have no leverage at all. It makes it tough, where I had to like spin the heat gun around, use my thumb, and then kind of come back and then do this. And this one has a trigger here. See, leverage, very easy. So you can kind of turn on, turn off, turn on, turn off. You want it in the back. Very, very important. Now, I also got some knifeless tape. This is important for cutting contours, shapes, maybe even straight lines on vinyl that you've already put down on the vehicle, so that you're not using your blade and cutting into the paint itself. So the way it works is you lay this down where you want the cut to be, and then you put the vinyl down. Just make sure you have excess tape coming out of the edge of that vinyl, and then you peel the tape back on itself, and then you hold it down with your thumb, and then you pull it, and that will basically release this cordage that's in between this tape. It's like a floss. And then once you've got that freed up, then you pull that, and then that will basically cut the vinyl to the shape that you want it to be, and it cuts it from underneath. It's very, very helpful, so you're not cutting into the paint with a blade. It did take me a while to get used to this. It took me a lot of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's very invaluable. And then finally, magnets. So you cut your vinyl to the shape that you want it, put it up against the panel where you're gonna put it, and then you use these magnets to hold it in place so that you can make sure it's positioned right. Just hold it in place so you know where it's gonna go. Then you can start peeling the backing off. Without these, you're gonna be sitting there trying to fumble, and yeah, get a bunch of these. So yeah, that's basically all you need. You need your vinyl, you need your blade, and make sure you get the blade too, where you're snipping off portions of it at a time to keep it super sharp. Some extra blades, your vinyl cutter, a measuring tape. I actually got a retractable one, some knifeless tape, a squeegee. That's it. That's the word I was looking for earlier. Squeegee. Your magnets and your heat gun with the trigger in the back. And that's pretty much all you need to put a wrap on your vehicle. So let me show you what I did. I won't go into full details on this part, but first thing I did was do a complete wash on the vehicle. For this, I'm using products from Salt Shift, who specializes in formulas that remove the kind of grime often found on off-road vehicles, things like salt, dust, and mud. I did a full review of their products if you want to check them out. I'll link to their website in the description. Here I'm just blowing out as much dust as I can and then spraying water to keep the dust from flying up. I did this every time I started wrapping a new panel. Starting with the rear, I removed everything from the spare tire to my spare fuel tank, trim pieces, and the door handle. The bolts holding the door handle can be accessed from the other side behind the vent, and it's very easy to remove. Also, before I wrap the piece, I would do another wash, and after it's dried, I wipe the entire area with 91% isopropyl alcohol to remove dirt and residue. Now, this is a good time to mention that between removing parts, cleaning panels, and installing the wrap itself, it's so important to organize all of your tools. You don't want to lose bolts and parts you have to reinstall later. You also don't want to have to search for a tool you need while holding vinyl. Using the magnets, I held a large piece in place, removed the back, and then slowly started forming the vinyl. And this is where I made my first mistake. I kept the heat gun too long in one area and it burned a hole right through. With the vinyl being brown, I didn't even notice that it was starting to burn. This was the only time I made this mistake now that I knew at what point I should stop heating it. Anyhow, I decided to just move on by finishing the wrap and decided to address that later. I cut out the area for the keyhole, which also helped release any trapped air around it. Then I made my way around the hinges. I didn't need to be super clean here as it will be covered later by the trim. Then I cut out the holes for everything else. Using knifeless tape, I decided to make a patch where I burned the hole. I'm not too worried as this area will be completely unseen and hidden behind my spare fuel tank. For the indent behind the door handle, I'm using this cover plate from Hook Road, but we'll talk more about that later. Now I'm going to fast forward to a month later when I rewrapped the rear corner panel and wheel well now that I knew how to wrap it better. First, I needed to remove the silicone left behind from the plugs I used to cover holes from an old roof rack. I'm using a product from Cowl and their stuff is awesome. It removed a lot of residue like rubber and RTV. Just make sure you don't use it on any other surface but automotive paint. With the taillight, license plate holder, and fuel tank trim removed, I placed the vinyl over and cut out the excess from the top and in the wheel well. Because of this awkward shape, I decided to do this area by peeling off a bit at a time to keep the wrap from sticking where I didn't want it to. I started with the edge closest to the door and made my way backwards. As I did this, I also heated the vinyl enough to form around the sponsor decals I had. This was a nice touch, I thought, creating an embossed look with the logos. You do need to heat the vinyl enough so that it forms perfectly around the logo details, but not too much that you burn the vinyl. Now I'm just cutting around the wheel well to relieve the tension created by the extra vinyl below it. It didn't have to be super clean here either because the fender will cover it later. Now in this go round, I decided to use one large piece to cover above the wheel well and the back corner panels, whereas I used two pieces the first time. This was way cleaner, especially when going over the seam that separates the two panels. I will say it was more challenging than I anticipated because the corners of the Jeep is actually not as straight as I thought. It has a slight bulge to it, and that bulge causes the material to bunch up once you come around that corner. I had to work it a lot to get those bulges and wrinkles out a little bit at a time. My friend Steve told me later that next time, use a much larger piece to prevent that bunching. With the vinyl installed, I cut out the holes for the fuel, taillight, and license plate holder, then cut the vinyl at the edges. Now that panel between the doors was pretty easy to do. It's very flat and thin. I did this in sections, removing vinyl backing as I worked from top to bottom. Then using the door as a guide, I cut off the excess and then tucked it inside the door jambs. Now at the bottom, I cut the vinyl so that the excess will fall unseen behind my rock sliders. Notice I didn't use one piece for the entire bottom below the doors. I'll be covering the entire bottom area with a black runner later, so there's no point wasting this vinyl on an area that will be covered by another color anyway. Now comes the small panels surrounding my windshield. First the cowls on each side of the Jeep, which was super easy. Then the A-pillar bottom piece, which I removed. I removed them so I can just wrap this at the workbench, which made it much easier to manipulate. It's definitely a more awkward shape, so I just had to be more careful when navigating the corners and edges. I'm glad I was doing this off the vehicle so I can turn it and attack it from different angles. But before I put it back on, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the rest of the area around the windshield. Here I'm using knifeless tape to determine where I'm going to have a seam because I'll be doing the area around my windshield in 3 sections. 2 long pieces for the sides and 1 long piece for the top. Now I could have used one piece to cover the whole area around the windshield so that we don't have any seams, but that would have required me to cut a large piece of vinyl just to cover a thin area. Doing it in sections, however, allows me to utilize some of the spare pieces of vinyl that was already starting to pile up in my garage. Pulling back on the knifeless tape just made a straight line that will give the seam a cleaner look. Plus the seam will be somewhat hidden anyway behind the front brackets of my roof rack, so it'll be difficult to tell that the windshield was done in sections. Now remember what I said about keeping your blade sharp? Well, I was trying to use the same blade to conserve my supply, and all it ended up doing was making the cut more difficult and sloppy. Yeah, don't get cheap like I did. Buy a ton of extra blades and change it often. Like, seriously. Now moving on to the front wheel wells, I needed to remove the Jeep badging. With a heat gun and a trim tool, it came off pretty easy. Then again, Cowl to remove the leftover residue. I didn't show it here, but the other side has the radio antenna in lieu of the badge. I unscrewed the antenna and pried off the trim in order to place the vinyl around it. Now starting with the largest area, I smoothed it out from the center and then made my way towards the front of the vehicle, removing the vinyl backing as I went. Now you'll notice that the bottom comes up short of covering the side of the vehicle. You might also notice there's a line of knifeless tape there as well. This was intentional. I'll be wrapping the bottom with a black runner later, and cutting off this wrap at that line allows me to save vinyl by not having to cut a wider and longer piece. This will make a bit more sense when we get to that part later in the video. Now the front part was pretty tricky. Make sure to heat the vinyl just enough in order to stretch it over, and make sure to heat it after to lock in the memory so it doesn't lift back up. I didn't show it here, but as per usual, I cut the excess and tucked it in at the top, and then I cut off the excess near the fenders. And again, doesn't have to be precise here either, as most of this will be covered by the front fenders. Now this was actually the third time I had to wrap the hood. The hood, as flat as it was actually the most difficult because the piece is so large and you're wrapping with the vinyl laying flat. Gravity is going to grab hold of the vinyl and make it start sticking, and the large size makes it harder to lift up and reposition. To combat this, I turned the vinyl over and cut 2 slits in the middle. Then using that as a guide, I removed a strip of backing to reveal just a sliver of vinyl down the middle. I then turned it back over and started to lay that part down on the hood. Then little by little, I started on one half, removing the backing as I went until I got to the edge. Then I repeated the same process on the other half. Using heat, I formed the area where the hood latches go and then carefully made my way around the corners and front, making sure to heat it just enough to not have tension. Now I cut the vinyl along the edge here, but the next day found that it started to lift at the edges. To solve this issue, I just used a long piece as a trim patch to cover the edges. Next time, I'll wrap the vinyl around the edge and inside the hood, and then use the patch on the inside where it won't be seen. Here I'm just wrapping beneath the hood hinges. I conformed the vinyl to the indents and then placed the hinge over it for a clean look. Now instead of wrapping the hinge itself, I decided to just use a hinge cover. It'll do for now, but I really wasn't a huge fan as it made the hinges bulge out too much. At some point, I'll just purchase aftermarket hinges that already come in black. Now the panel around the windshield wipers has a lot of weird shapes and deep wells and vents, so I want to remove it and bring it to the workbench to make it easier to wrap. To do that, we have to remove the wiper arms. It's not very difficult. Just lift up on the protective cap, unscrew the bolt, and then use a pry bar or a couple screwdrivers to pry it off. Now depending on how long it's been there, you might have to use some WD-40 and work it out slowly. Just make sure the wiper arms are in a folded configuration to release the tension it has on the rods. Now as I mentioned, this panel has a lot of weird shapes and curves. You won't be able to just use one large piece. So here I'm using knifeless tape to create inlays for the wells. Then I laid the main vinyl piece on top, wrapped it accordingly along the flat part and the edges. Then I cut a hole where the wells are in order to locate the ends of the knifeless tape. And from there I was able to cut out that shape precisely. Now for the grill, I just cut some slits and then heated the vinyl enough for it to conform into the grill. Honestly, I might have to redo this whole piece again in the future, as I have a feeling the vinyl is going to lift up inside the grill. There's just way too much tension in there. This was truly the most complex piece to wrap, and I'm tempted to just bring this to a shop and have a professional wrap this piece for me. So I have a couple of things here from Hook Road. I have these covers, and these will go into that little dent behind the door handles. That part is really tough to try to vinyl wrap because we would have to create basically a perfect circle and then drop that in there, which we can do, but this just makes it a little bit easier. It has a sticky back. It's already black. If I want to vinyl wrap this in the same color as the Jeep, I could do so, but I'm just going to keep it this way. I also have new hinges. The old hinges I had before, as you can see, it's already kind of chipped and it's bubbling up in some areas, and going through the hassle of trying to vinyl wrap these, it's better to just get some brand new black hinges and then I don't have to do anything to this at all. And then finally I have new steps, the steps that I've had before. it's already rusting out. It's sad because I really liked this style of steps. It's so simple, but the problem is the company that makes this is no longer in business. The only thing about this one though from Hook Road is that it has this since 1941 logo on it, and I'm not really a fan of that branding. I wish Hook Road just made simple ones, plain ones with nothing on them at all, just plain black steps without any branding. I think that would be the most ideal. But yeah, let's get the doors wrapped, put the stuff on, and we'll be closer and closer to the finish line. And finally, it's time to wrap the doors, but we're gonna need to remove some of the hardware on the outside. To do this, we have to remove the inside door panel. Start by removing the 2 Torx bolts found at the bottom corner. After that, remove the trim behind the door handle and remove that Torx bolt as well. Then you'll be able to take off the trim surrounding the door handle. Then finally, remove the 2 bolts behind the armrest trim. Those outside bolts on the trim are actually not functional, they're just decorative. Pop the whole trim off and then you'll find the 2 bolts behind it. Once all 5 bolts have been removed, use a trim removal tool to pop the panel off. Now lift up off the window channel and make sure to disconnect the wiring harness. After that, you're also going to need to disconnect the other 2 harnesses that go to the rear view mirror. I'll explain in a bit why I'm tying a rope to the end of it. Alright, so it's time for us to remove the door handle and the side mirrors. Starting with the door, you'll be able to get to one of the bolts through this little hole here. And you'll see that there's a bolt in there. The other bolt, I don't know why Jeep decided to not have an access hole here. We don't want to have to take this whole thing out just to get to that bolt. You can actually drill somewhere right here. We're going to create a hole in there, and that'll give us access to that other bolt, and then the handle will just come out. Now the side mirrors, that's actually pretty simple as well. The 2 bolts for that are right here. Once you take these bolts out, then the mirror will just come out. But here's the tricky part. There is a wiring harness that goes from that mirror through here and then out through this hole here and into this harness here. When you try to put this back on later, you're going to have a very, very hard time trying to route that wire back through the door and then find a way to get back through this hole here, which is why I went and tied a piece of rope at the end of this. So when we feed this through here, this rope is going to go with it, and I'm going to leave rope dangling here and then out on the other side. This rope will be able to feed through our vinyl, through a hole in our vinyl later once we put the vinyl on. And then when we put the mirror back on, we just tie the harness back to the end of it on the outside and then pull it from here, and that'll bring everything back through again. Now I'm warning you, be very careful when removing those nuts holding the door handles. What you don't want is for those nuts to fall inside the door, and it'll become almost impossible to retrieve them without having to take the entire door apart. What I did was attach a magnet at the end of my socket wrench to catch it as it came off the bolt. Now for the wrap itself, I positioned the vinyl over the door, then cut out the area where the window is and saved that piece for another application. Then I removed the backing from the top and started working my way down. Here I'm just cutting a small hole so I can feed that rope through for the mirror wiring harness. Now here's the thing. I need to wrap behind the door hinges but don't want to remove both door hinges together, as that will screw up the positioning and balance of the door. So I kept the bottom one on and then removed the top hinge so I can vinyl behind it. Once the top half of the door was wrapped, I put the new top hinge on and made sure it was tight, and then removed the bottom hinge and wrapped behind that one. Once that was completed, I put the bottom hinge on, which now secures the door fully, and I was able to proceed with the rest of the wrap. When it's time to put the door handles back, again, I don't want to lose the nuts while trying to thread it onto the bolts, so I used some painter's tape to secure it to my socket. Now for the rear view mirror, I tied the harness back on the rope and fed it through and then reinstalled the mirror. From the inside, I needed to just pull the rope carefully and my harness is routed back through again. Now just place everything back in the reverse order that you took them off. Now as part of my overall vision, I decided to add a black runner to the bottom along each side. Here I'm just measuring how high I want it to be, then laid some painter's tape to make sure it runs straight. Because there are doors and panels, I didn't necessarily have to use one large piece for this. I just needed to make sure I had straight pieces that I would match up at the top. And then finally I installed the hinge steps. Remember, don't take off the top and bottom hinges at the same time and screw up the door balance. Make sure there are always bolts in place to hold the door's position.
Alright, wrap is done. So, cinematic reveal in 3, 2...
And that's a wrap. Oh, great use of that pun. Oh man, that was difficult. I don't think I've done that much tugging and pulling since puberty. Dude, I was using curse words I didn't even know I knew. Did I make mistakes? Well, on a scale of 1 to Dak Prescott, I would say I was like Dak Prescott in the playoffs. Oh hush, you know I'm not lying. Now I am being too hard on myself though, because last weekend at Save, I showed the vehicle to my friend Steve, who runs a wrap business somewhere in Central Florida. And I said, go around my vehicle and tell me how much I this thing up. And he walked around and he said, you know, for someone who's never wrapped a vehicle before, I'm actually really impressed. Obviously, there were some mistakes and he pointed out to me how I could improve those mistakes. But for the most part, he said I did a pretty good job. And if I just stick with it, then in a couple of years, I'd probably be really good at it. Thank you, Steve. That actually really boosted my confidence like a lot. Wrapping a vehicle takes a lot of patience, especially when you're first starting out. I remember doing one side of the vehicle, there was a panel that I was doing there, and it took me like 2 hours to finally get it done without any wrinkles, without any air bubbles. By the time I had done the other parts of the vehicle and got back around to the other side of the exact same panel, I remember looking at my watch going, I have 45 minutes before I gotta go pick up my kid at school. I wonder if I can get it done in that time. And I did it in like 30 minutes and it was perfect because it does take practice. It takes practice on learning how your vinyl's going to react, how much heat you have to put on it. Too much heat and you're gonna burn a hole through the vinyl, which I've done many times. Not enough heat and it's not gonna be malleable enough and you're gonna get air bubbles and wrinkles, which I've also done many times. But after a while, you start to get a feel on how the vinyl reacts. It's also really important to plan out your angle of attack here too. You have to go at it in a certain way to prevent as little wrinkles and air bubbles as possible. There are different ways that people attack a particular panel, and you'll only learn that once you start getting the hang of it on which way to go. You also want to avoid areas of tension with the vinyl, like certain places where you're going to come to the edge and you'll notice that it started to like wrinkle up in that area, and you take your heat gun and you heat it and you pull it, but then the next day you wake up and you see that it's already starting to lift because there was a lot of tension happening there. And I brought that up to Steve and he said that a lot of the reasons that that happens is my piece wasn't actually big enough. Like if it's big enough, then you can stretch it to where you're not going to get the tension there, and the tension happens on the end of the piece, which is far away from the panel that you are wrapping. So that was a really good tip. I will say though, order extra of the vinyl because you are going to make mistakes. Don't buy it later, right? Because sometimes too, the color might shift. In fact, I needed extra footage from TinyBot and I needed to give them the stock number of the vinyl that they sent me. I can't just give them the color because there might be some slight variations. So if I were you, I would buy like a 60-foot roll and then maybe like an extra 20 feet of it, just so you have it on the sides in case you need to redo panels. But also in the future, if you need to replace a panel, you have some spares. So make sure you get some extra vinyl with that. Speaking of, I actually used some of that extra material to redo some of the parts that I had done earlier in the process where I didn't know what I was doing, which is actually a really great advantage when it comes to vinyl, by the way, that you can just replace certain parts and you don't have to redo the entire vehicle like you would have to with paint. Also, don't underestimate the part that you're wrapping. Like what part you think is going to be easy to wrap turns out to actually be really hard. And the parts that you think are going to be hard to wrap, well, it's going to be harder. Which leads to the million-dollar question, should you wrap your own vehicle? Well, it depends on which you value more, time or money. If you have the time, but your money, you have a set budget for this wrap, then buy the vinyl and try it yourself. Just know you're probably going to spend many, many hours, lots and lots of weekends, lots of nights and days just trying to get your vehicle wrapped. And you might be driving around town a lot with part of your vehicle wrapped and the other part not. But what you get out of that is just pride. You can look back at it and say, you know what? I didn't do that half bad of a job, and later on redo some of those parts where you messed up, and at the end of it all you'll have the experience and the knowledge on wrapping a vehicle. Now if you have the money, you have $3,000 to $5,000 ish set aside to do a vehicle wrap and you just don't have the time to do it yourself, then having a shop, and more importantly a reputable shop, do the wrap for you is not the baddest of ideas. Just drop it off to them, let them do their thing, and when you pick it up, it's beautiful, it's done, and you don't have anything to worry about, and you don't have to throw out curse words like I did. Just keep in mind that vehicle wraps will only last, they say, 3 to 5 years at most, and then you have to replace it because it does get brittle or it's going to deteriorate. You need to get that old vinyl off and put new vinyl down. So if you're okay with spending $3,000 to $5,000 every 5 years or so to have someone wrap your vehicle for you, then by all means go and do that. Now me, I'm probably gonna stick to trying to wrap this vehicle again myself in about 3 to 5 years. I learned a lot from this process, and I know that the next time I have to wrap this vehicle again, I'm not gonna make as many mistakes as I did this time around because I've gotten familiar with how to work that material. So 3 to 5 years, I don't know, maybe I'll stick with the same color or choose a different color, but either way, the knowledge and experience I gained from this allows me now the freedom to, wrap this vehicle whenever I feel like it, really. But anyway, that's it. I know this video is like long, but there was a lot involved with wrapping a vehicle, and I hope that you got some stuff out of it. If you have any questions, drop it in the comments below. If I can answer it, hopefully one of you who wrap vehicles like well and are a professional at it can address some of the questions that some of my viewers might have. That would really be helpful. Just again, don't be mean to me. I do want to give a quick shout out to TinyBot Vinyl for sending me their vinyl and allowing me to do this project. Go check their website out, man. They have a ton of really cool colors that are unique. So if you're looking for that color that no one else might have, go check out TinyBot Vinyl. They're awesome over there. If you enjoyed this video though, please make sure you don't smash, wrap that like button, subscribe to our channel, click that notification bell so we can let you be aware of new videos when they come out. And if it moves you, support us on Patreon. It gives you access to all of our live streams and gives you access to all of our videos before everyone else. And as always, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Baptism Overland. My name is Aisha Sampson, and I will see you next time.